Welcome to Bible Study 24H, where hidden letters, unexpected journeys, and the eternal whispers of faith come alive. Today, we bring you a story unlike anything you've heard before, a story of an unexpected letter, a secret legacy, and a bridge between worlds that even death could not silence. Shortly after the passing of Pope Francis, a letter was delivered not to a cardinal, not to a world leader, but to Mohamed Salah, the humble footballer beloved by millions. Inside a message so personal, so profound it would send Salah on a silent pilgrimage to Rome, to a hidden place, to a forgotten promise, and to a mission larger than himself. What could the Pope have seen in Salah? What secret did he entrust to a man whose life had already touched so many across boundaries of faith and culture? Stay with us as we unveil the extraordinary journey sparked by a simple letter and the living bridge that Pope Francis hoped would outlast even the walls of the Vatican itself. If you believe stories of hope and unexpected faith deserve to be heard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bible Study 24H, where every story brings us closer to the heart of what truly matters. The rain fell steadily over Liverpool that morning, soft and gray like the kind of sorrow that doesn't shout but sits quietly on the heart. Mohamed Salah, still grieving the passing of Pope Francis, a figure he had long admired from afar, was finishing his training when a staff member approached him holding an envelope. No postage marks, no fanfare. Just a simple white envelope with one word handwritten on it: Salah. At first, he thought it might be a mistake, an invitation perhaps, a formal acknowledgement from a charity he supported. But when he turned the envelope over and saw the crimson seal, the unmistakable insignia of the Vatican, his heart began to pound. He opened it slowly, almost reverently. Inside, on thick parchment, was a single handwritten letter: "My dear Salah." It began in a script both fragile and firm. "If you are reading this, then I have already gone to the house of the Father. But there is still a journey you must take, not for me, but for the bridge we must continue to build between hearts." Salah sat down heavily, the words washing over him like the rain tapping at the windows. The letter spoke of bridges not of stone or politics, but of lives, of stories, of hands reaching across divides that had separated humanity for too long. Pope Francis spoke of Salah's quiet example of the way he carried his faith not as a sword, but as a lamp. And then near the end came the words that chilled him: "There is a place you must find. Ask for Elias. He will know why you have come." There were no further instructions, no map, no explanation, just a name and a silent call that Salah could not ignore. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The world outside continued its noise. Matches were scheduled, interviews lined up, obligations pressed in. But inside Salah, something deeper stirred. He booked a flight to Rome that evening, quietly, without press, without public statements, without even his closest confidants knowing why. Some journeys, he realized, were meant to be taken in silence. As the plane rose into the night sky, Salah pressed the letter to his heart and closed his eyes. Somewhere in the eternal city, a man named Elias was waiting. And beyond that meeting, perhaps, a mission greater than anything he had ever dreamed. The rain continued to fall in Liverpool, washing the streets clean. And as Salah crossed the dark waters between what was and what could be, he whispered a silent prayer, not for success, not for recognition, but for the courage to walk through a door he could not yet see, toward a destiny he did not yet understand. Stay with us, because what awaited Salah in Rome would not only change his life, it would ignite a light meant to heal what centuries of walls had kept apart. The plane touched down in Rome beneath a sky heavy with twilight, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Salah moved quietly through the bustling crowds of Fiumicino Airport, unnoticed, blending into the rhythms of a world that had no idea the weight he carried tucked close to his chest. The letter from Pope Francis, so simple in form, yet so heavy in meaning, pulsed against his heart with every step. It wasn't just the words that haunted him. It was what they left unsaid. At his hotel, under the soft glow of a single lamp, Salah unfolded the letter again, his fingers trembling slightly. He had read it countless times on the flight, but now, alone in the stillness, he saw details he had missed before. Each line seemed to breathe a deeper life, as if the Pope had poured into them not just ink, but spirit, the bridge we must build. It said, "Is not one of doctrine, but of mercy, not one of conversion, but of communion." It struck Salah deeply. This man, leader of millions, had seen beyond the ancient walls that too often divided believers into tribes and strangers. He had seen something greater, a hope that different faiths could meet, not to erase one another, but to see the face of God shining through each other's wounds. Further down the letter grew even more intimate. "You, Salah, have carried the light of your faith into stadiums filled with every nation, every creed, not by force, not by pride, but by living simply loving deeply and refusing to let the world's divisions harden your heart. You are not asked to preach. You are asked to remember, to remind the world that the language of kindness is older than any book, and that to touch a soul requires no permission, no title, no victory." Tears welled in Salah's eyes, blurring the careful script before him. He was no theologian, no scholar. He was a man of simple faith, a footballer who prayed quietly on the pitch and gave generously in secret. Why had Pope Francis chosen him? But deeper than the doubt was a stirring certainty. This calling wasn't about qualifications. It was about trust, about obedience to something greater than understanding. Near the bottom of the page, written more faintly, as if with a hand weakened by time, were the final instructions. "There is a house in Rome, Casa di Luca. You will find Elias there. Tell him you come not with answers, but with a heart willing to listen." And then, almost as a blessing, "Blessed are the bridge builders, for they shall be called children of God." Salah folded the letter with reverent hands, his soul trembling at the magnitude of what was unfolding. Tomorrow he would find Casa di Luca. Tomorrow he would meet Elias, and whatever waited beyond that door, he would face it not as a star, not as a symbol, but simply as a man willing to say yes to a whisper that reached across death itself. "Stay with us." Because the next step of Salah's journey would unveil a secret hidden even deeper than he could ever imagine. The morning in Rome was crisp, the air tinged with the faint aroma of coffee, and the distant echo of church bells weaving through the narrow stone streets. Salah moved with quiet purpose, his footsteps blending into the rhythms of a city ancient and alive, where every worn brick seemed to hum with forgotten prayers. Clutching the letter tightly in his jacket, he navigated through winding alleyways and bustling piazzas, guided not by maps or signs, but by a pull deep within his chest, as if the very spirit of the city was nudging him forward. The Vatican loomed in the distance, its grand dome rising like a silent sentinel. But Salah did not move toward the heart of power. Instead, he followed smaller streets, more hidden paths, where the grandeur of Rome gave way to its humbler soul. As he walked, doubts flickered in his mind, doubts about his place in this unfolding mystery, doubts about whether he would find the man called Elias, or even the house named Casa di Luca. But beneath the surface of uncertainty, there was a deeper current, steady and sure, whispering that some journeys are not about finding, but about becoming. He paused at a small fountain in a forgotten corner of the city, watching as an old woman fed breadcrumbs to a flock of pigeons. For a moment, he envied her simplicity, her unhurried presence in a world always racing toward the next destination. But then he remembered the words of the letter, and he realized the bridge he had been asked to build was not paved with certainties, but with faith that the next step, however small, would lead exactly where it needed to. At last, after what felt like both an eternity and an instant, Salah found himself standing before a modest stone building tucked between two crumbling apartment blocks. A weathered wooden sign above the doorway read in faded letters, Casa di Luca. The house was unremarkable by any worldly measure, its facade cracked by time, its shutters leaning slightly askew. But as Salah stepped closer, a warmth seemed to radiate from within, not the physical warmth of fire or light, but something deeper, a welcome woven into the very air, a silent assurance that he was expected, that he was already known. Taking a slow breath, Salah raised his hand and knocked. For a few moments there was only the sound of his heartbeat and the distant murmur of Rome beyond the narrow street. Then the door creaked open and an old man appeared, thin, silver-haired, his eyes deep wells of sorrow and kindness. Without speaking, the man looked at Salah and then at the envelope still clutched in his hand. A slow, knowing smile crossed his weathered face. "You have come," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of 100 unshed stories. And as Salah stepped across the threshold of Casa di Luca, he knew instinctively that the true journey, the one that mattered, was only just beginning. The door of Casa di Luca closed gently behind them, muffling the distant sounds of the city and wrapping Salah in a stillness so profound it felt almost sacred. The old man Elias led him through a narrow hallway where faded photographs lined the walls, images of children laughing, running, clinging to life with a fierceness that only the forgotten seemed to possess. They entered a modest sitting room, where the air smelled faintly of old books and warm bread, and where the furniture bore the soft weariness of years spent comforting tired souls. Elias motioned for Salah to sit, and for a long moment they said nothing, allowing the silence to stretch between them, not as a barrier, but as a bridge. When Elias finally spoke, his voice was low and steady, like the quiet flow of a river long accustomed to carrying burdens unseen by the world. "I have waited for you," he said simply, as if stating a truth older than either of them. Salah, still clutching the letter, leaned forward slightly, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't understand why me." Elias smiled gently, as if he had heard that question many times before from many different lips. "It was never about who you are in the world's eyes," he said. "It was about the light you carry when you think no one is watching." He rose slowly and crossed the room to a small cabinet tucked away in a corner. From it he retrieved a worn leather journal, its pages thick and uneven, its binding cracked by years of use. He placed it carefully in Salah's hands. This, Elias said, was his dream. Salah opened the journal and saw pages filled with sketches and words, not grand theological treatises or decrees of doctrine, but simple notes, stories told by children, verses of hope scribbled in shaky hands, drawings of bridges stretching over turbulent waters, bridges built not of stone, but of people laughing, weeping, holding hands. Pope Francis had not left behind a blueprint for a cathedral. He had left a dream for a home, a shelter, a place where divisions dissolved in the face of shared humanity. Casa di Luca, Elias explained, was more than just a shelter for orphan children. It was the beating heart of a vision where faith did not divide but embraced, where mercy was not a doctrine but a living act, where no child was asked who they prayed to before they were given a bed, a meal, a hand to hold. "You were chosen," Elias said, his voice growing softer, "because you understand, not through words, but through the way you live. Because bridges are not built by those who shout the loudest. They are built by those who kneel first." Salah bowed his head, the weight of the moment settling deep into his soul. He felt no triumph, no pride, only a profound sense of awe, of responsibility, of belonging to something infinitely larger than himself. He looked up at Elias, his voice steady, despite the tears that blurred his vision. "What do you need me to do?" Elias smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had waited his whole life for that question. "Not much," he said, rising slowly. "Just build the bridge and then trust that others will find their way across." And so, in a simple room in a forgotten corner of Rome, a new chapter of a very old story began, a story not of power but of hope, not of conquest but of connection. And Salah, the unlikely bearer of an unlikely dream, took his first step onto a bridge that even death could not destroy. The afternoon light slanted through the windows of Casa di Luca, painting long golden bars across the worn wooden floors. Salah sat with the journal still open on his lap, his fingers tracing the uneven edges of the pages as if he could feel beneath the ink and paper the pulse of a vision that refused to die. Elias moved slowly around the room, gathering small objects from dusty shelves. A frayed football once kicked by children, long grown, a painting of a sun rising over a broken bridge, a rosary missing several beads but worn smooth from countless prayers. Each item, he explained softly, was a piece of the mosaic Pope Francis had started building in secret, far from the eyes of the world. "This place," Elias said, his voice almost reverent, "was never meant to be famous. It was never meant to be another monument to good intentions. It was meant to be alive, a living bridge between what is broken and what can be whole." He handed Salah another envelope yellowed at the edges with his name, written in the same familiar hand as the letter he had first received. Inside, Salah found a simple note, almost childlike in its directness. "There will be no statues of this house, no headlines, no awards. Only hearts healed by kindness, too quiet to be noticed by the world, but never forgotten by heaven." The words hit Salah harder than any roar of a stadium, harder than any medal or trophy he had ever held. This was not a call to fame. It was a call to invisibility, to labor in the silent fields where only God saw the seeds being sown. Elias led him into a small courtyard behind the house, where a dozen children played beneath an ancient olive tree. They laughed and shouted in a wild chorus of languages, Arabic, Italian, English, and others Salah could not even name, weaving together a music more real than any anthem. One little girl, her hair tied in uneven braids, ran up to him and placed a small daisy in his hand without a word. She smiled, missing 2 front teeth, and then dashed away, her laughter trailing behind her like a comet's tail. Salah stood there, daisy in hand, the sounds of life swirling around him, and realized that he was standing in the heart of the dream Pope Francis had left behind. Not in a cathedral, not in a throne room, but here among the forgotten, among the small ones, among those the world rarely remembers. He turned back to Elias, who was watching him with a quiet hope. "You were never meant to carry this alone," Elias said, "but you are meant to begin." Salah closed his fingers around. The daisy bowed his head and silently made a promise, not to Pope Francis, not even to Elias, but to the unseen God who had whispered through a dying man's hand onto parchment, and through a simple letter into the heart of a man who never sought greatness, only goodness. The bridge had been started. Now it was time to finish it. The decision was not made with fanfare. There was no grand press conference, no public announcement to the world. It was made in the quiet of Salah's heart, a promise whispered in the spaces where applause cannot reach. Within days of his return to England, Salah set the wheels in motion. Through trusted friends and anonymous channels, he arranged for Casa di Luca to receive the resources it desperately needed: repairs to the crumbling walls, warm beds for every child, classrooms filled with books, and a courtyard turned into a sanctuary where laughter could bloom without fear. He funded the rebuilding not in his own name but under a simple title, Il Ponte, the bridge. And in every decision, from the color of the walls to the texture of the playground sand, Salah carried with him the spirit of the letter he had once unfolded with trembling hands to build without seeking to possess, to heal without seeking to be praised, to serve without seeking to be seen. He returned to Casa de Luca quietly, often slipping into the courtyard unnoticed, blending into the background as children played around him, without realizing that the man who had made their new home possible was kneeling in the dust beside them. He taught them how to kick a ball with joy rather than anger. He listened to their broken Italian, their dreams spoken in broken English, their stories stitched together with more hope than grammar. He sat with them through homework, through scraped knees, through silent tears no camera would ever capture. Little by little, Casa de Luca transformed. The cracked walls became murals painted by tiny hands. The barren garden grew into a wild, joyful tangle of colors. The old library became a sanctuary where stories stitched together every lost piece of every child's heart. But more than the buildings, it was the spirit of the place that changed. Children who had once flinched at every loud sound began to dance. Children who had once hoarded scraps of bread began to share freely. Children who had once forgotten how to dream began to speak of futures filled with wonder as doctors, teachers, artists, builders of bridges themselves. And through it all, Salah remained quietly in the background, refusing interviews, declining offers for publicity, shielding the fragile miracle from the blinding light of fame, because he knew, as Pope Francis had known, that real bridges are not built by the famous, they are built by the faithful. On a cool spring evening, as the sun sank low behind the rooftops of Rome, Salah sat beneath the ancient olive tree in the courtyard, watching the children chase each other through the fading light. He closed his eyes and offered a silent prayer, not for victory, not for success, but simply for the courage to continue one small act of love at a time. Because some journeys, he realized, never truly end. They only deepen. And in the heart of Rome, among those who had been forgotten, a new bridge had been built, one that would stretch farther than any road, stronger than any stone, carrying the hope of generations yet to come. Il Ponte did not make headlines. It did not trend on social media or appear in glossy magazines. It grew in the way that living things often do, quietly, patiently, almost invisibly at first, like a seed cracking open deep beneath the soil where no one could see. Word spread, not through newspapers, but from child to child, from family to family, from heart to heart. Those who found refuge within its worn stone walls spoke not of miracles but of mornings filled with laughter and nights without fear, of a place where no one asked about your past before offering you a future. Children who had once been defined by their losses, orphans of war, refugees from forgotten conflicts, survivors of tragedies too painful to name, began to find something stronger than survival. They found belonging. And slowly, Il Ponte became more than a shelter. It became a living symbol. Volunteers came from distant corners of the world, drawn not by advertising or campaigns, but by quiet testimonies passed from hand to trembling hand. They came carrying no banners, only open hearts and willing hands. Teachers, doctors, musicians, builders, all gathering under the same simple dream to build a bridge where there had once been only broken ground. And the children, once silenced by grief, found their voices again. Some painted murals along the outer walls, bright bursts of color turning cracked stone into a gallery of hope. Some formed choirs, singing songs stitched from every language they knew. Others simply laughed, a sound more sacred than any anthem, more healing than any sermon. Salah watched it all unfold from the sidelines, never drawing attention to himself, refusing accolades when they came. He understood now what Pope Francis had tried to teach. The strongest bridges are those whose builders are forgotten because they were never building for themselves. Every year, more houses like Il Ponte quietly sprang up, each bearing no corporate logos, no marble plaques, just a simple mark, a small hand-drawn bridge, and the words whispered like a prayer, "Blessed are the bridge builders, for they shall be called children of God." Governments ignored them, pundits missed them, but those who needed them found their way, guided not by announcements, but by unseen currents of grace. And as Salah walked through the courtyard one evening past children reading beneath the olive tree, he realized that what they were building could never be measured in numbers or monuments. It would be measured in hearts mended, in dreams reborn, in bridges stretched invisibly across the deep wounds of the world. The dream of one pope, the faith of one unlikely messenger, the courage of many quiet hearts. Il Ponte was never meant to be a place. It was always meant to be a way. And now, without noise, without fear, it was spreading from Rome to the forgotten edges of the world, carried by the hands of those who believed, as Salah now believed that love moves best where no one is watching. Time passed, marked not by calendars or clocks, but by the growing laughter of children and the quiet deepening of roots. At Il Ponte, life, fragile and tenacious, took hold in the cracks left by sorrow, but no bridge is built without bearing weight. And one spring morning, as the olive tree in the courtyard burst into trembling new leaves, a different kind of news arrived. News that bent Salah's heart under a grief he had not prepared for. Elias, the gentle guardian of Casa de Luca, had fallen ill. The sickness came quickly, like a silent storm, leukemia, the doctors said. There was little they could do now but make him comfortable. When Salah arrived at the hospital, the old man's body seemed shrunken beneath the white sheets, but his eyes still held the deep, unwavering light Salah had seen that first day at the door. Without ceremony, Elias beckoned him closer. From beneath his pillow, he pulled a folded page, thin-worn. The ink faded with age and the trembling of hands too tired to write much more. He pressed it into Salah's hand with a strength born not of the body, but of the spirit. This, Elias whispered, was meant for when the bridge was strong enough to carry it. Salah unfolded the page carefully. It was a final message written long ago by Pope Francis himself. A bridge is not finished when the first souls cross it. It is finished when those who built it step aside and others unknown, unseen, keep building beyond the horizon. "Promise me," Elias said, his voice breaking like a candle flickering against the wind. "Promise me you will not let it end with you." Salah bowed his head, unable to speak, past the ache in his throat. He gripped Elias's hand tightly, the simple, wordless promise passing between them like a river deeper than words. In the days that followed, as Elias's light gently faded from this world, Salah sat often at his bedside, reading to him from the children's drawings collected in Casa de Luca, singing soft songs from memories older than language, offering the only thing he could now: presence, gratitude, love. When Elias passed away, there were no grand processions. No marble monuments were erected in his name. Instead, the children gathered beneath the olive tree and tied dozens of small white ribbons to its branches, each one fluttering in the spring wind like a prayer carried skyward. And Salah, standing among them, knew the truth. Pope Francis had seen long before any of them did, that the greatest bridges are built not of stone, but of living hearts willing to bear the weight of love. The bridge had suffered a loss, but it had also received a new charge. It would not end here. It would carry forward across broken lands, across invisible divides, across generations, who might never know the names of those who first dared to believe that love, and only love, could hold a broken world together. Years passed as quietly as a river carves a canyon, slow, patient, unstoppable. The children of Casa di Luca grew tall under the shelter of the olive tree and the unseen arms of Il Ponte's founders. They carried with them the invisible marks of the bridge that had been built in the silence of love, resilience, tenderness, and the quiet courage to cross divides others still feared to name. Some left to become teachers, scattering across continents to places where no bridges yet existed, bringing the spirit of Il Ponte into forgotten classrooms and broken villages. Some became doctors stitching together bodies and unknowingly stitching together dreams. Some became simple neighbors, simple friends, the kind who see not the lines that separate us, but the hands waiting to be held. Each one carried a piece of the dream, like small seeds tucked secretly into their pockets, seeds that would one day find their own soil. Salah remained part of their lives not as a figure on a pedestal, but as a quiet presence in the background, sometimes showing up unannounced to watch a football match played barefoot on dusty fields, sometimes kneeling beside a child to help tie a stubborn shoelace. He knew now that greatness was never about being seen. It was about making sure others could rise without needing to know your name. On the 10th anniversary of Il Ponte's rebirth, the children, now young adults, gathered beneath the olive tree to celebrate not with speeches, but with stories. They shared memories of scraped knees and late-night laughter of broken hearts, mended by small kindnesses of a home where no one asked where you came from before they offered you bread. At the center of the courtyard stood a simple glass case newly installed at the base of the olive tree. Inside, carefully placed, was the original daisy that a little girl had once given Salah on his first visit, dried, now fragile, but still unmistakably whole. Next to it, encased in soft velvet, lay a new letter written by Salah himself. It was not addressed to a person. It was addressed to the future, to whoever finds this. It read, "Know this. The world does not need more heroes. It needs more bridges. Build them with laughter. Build them with mercy. Build them even when no one notices. Because somewhere, someone is waiting to cross." The young people stood in silence after reading it, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the evening sun. They understood. They were not the end of the bridge. They were its next stones, its next arches, its next outstretched hands. And somewhere, far beyond the horizon, Salah smiled and whispered a prayer of thanks for Pope Francis, for Elias, for every invisible hand that had lifted one broken stone upon another until a path across the impossible had been made real. The bridge was alive, and it would never stop growing. The seasons continued their gentle turning at Il Ponte. Children who had once clung to Salah's hands now returned taller, stronger, bearing stories of distant lands where they had built bridges of their own. Life pulsed through the old courtyard like a heartbeat, steady, resilient, unbreakable. Yet some dreams are planted not just for one lifetime, but for many. And so it was that one spring afternoon, long after Salah's visits had grown rarer and quieter, a young girl named Lena, barely 16, fierce-eyed and tender-hearted, knelt beneath the olive tree drawn to the small glass case she had passed 100 times before. The daisy inside was still there now, brittle with age but strangely beautiful, a testament to something that had survived beyond its season. Beside it, the letter Salah had written rested in its velvet frame. Most who came simply glanced at it, in passing, touched by the idea of it but never daring to disturb its rest. But Lena, curious and courageous, gently lifted the glass and unfolded the letter once more, tracing the faded words with trembling fingertips. The world does not need more heroes. It needs more bridges. She read it aloud, barely a whisper, as if speaking. It might weave it into the very air. And as she did, something ancient and new stirred within her, a knowing older than her years, a calling that made her heart ache and soar at once. Sitting there beneath the ancient tree, she realized something profound. Bridges are never finished. Every smile offered to a stranger, every injustice answered with kindness, every lonely soul given a hand to hold. These were the stones that built the bridges that would outlast kingdoms, outlast wars, outlast even memory itself. The olive tree's branches stirred above her, casting flickering patterns of light across the courtyard stones, as if heaven itself were breathing over the place. And Lena knew, as Salah had known, as Elias had known as a dying pope. Francis had once dared to hope that she too had a bridge to build. Not someday. Now she rose, heart steady, carrying the letter not in her hands but in her spirit, stepping into the unknown, not as a hero but as a builder of something far more enduring. As she disappeared down the narrow streets of Rome, her shadow long in the golden light, the old olive tree stood watch. Silent and strong, the bridge was alive. It would always be alive as long as there were still hands, willing to build hearts, willing to cross, and souls willing to believe that the smallest acts of love could hold the whole world together. And somewhere beyond sight, across rivers and oceans and the unseen currents of time, the whisper traveled, "Still blessed are the bridge builders, for they shall be called children of God."